Ta-da! And welcome to Josef's Model Railway, hey, and Toy Room. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. Girls and boys, ladies and gentlemen, just a little bit of housekeeping. You don't need to like, follow, or subscribe with any of my videos. I just put them out there where I can, and I have a holly jolly great time doing so. Today's video is going to be a bit epic. So much so that I found my pencil. After 30 years, I had a particular mechanical pencil I've been looking for and I found it. So it must be a good day today. And this is really a part one, because while we've got the core section all done, I still have quite a bit I need to do landscaping and going back and tidying it up that we'll come back to a little bit later. But it's all about the Petroleum depot today and what I wanted to create there. Ta-da! Yes, indeed, you can stop drooling now because this is what today's video is all about. This wonderful overhead fueling system that I have developed that we're going to be talking about and how it sits into place. Let's put this one aside. And also, I'd like to apologize because for all the footage I have, one bit did get skimmed over a little bit that we only briefly touch on. Just while I have your attention, this is the back wall we needed to create on the section. And I'll make mention of it, but basically we've just taken that flexible stone wall that we did use over in Noodle Knocker Junction, and we did cut it to shape. We also just took a little section of aluminium and glued the section together back like that. The top part is, once again, just our foam board that we use, which we just applied a little bit of swamp brown paint, dusted some dirt over it, and then came back, just chucked a few little bits of stones and a little bit of static grass, and it just slots into that spot nicely. You can see that is absolutely razor thin. So we've managed to create something quite nice, a little bit of weathering down there. We can come back and do a bit more as the scene needs it, but you almost don't see much of it all once our refueling system is in place. Another thing I did want to just take a quick moment on is I did take a little bit of a spare plastic kit that had what basically looks like, and we'll come in nice and close on the shot here. You'll see that these sort of plastic tiles that we've just painted and weathered up accordingly. I just took a few from a scrap kit that we didn't need, and I thought if we just put them in some key places, just to give you a little bit more definition of what's going on there. So we don't really talk about the construction of it other than what I've just told you now. So once again, before we start any of our little projects on this particular railway, I like to do my research. In this particular situation, it goes all the way back to the late 90s, early 2000s, when I spotted in one of the railway magazines this particular image. I was truly inspired by seeing what they did and creating some extra detail in what would just be stock standard sort of petroleum or oil depot or something like that. And I always had that in the back of the head. And as we look at a couple of other shots here, I started doing a bit of research, and most of what I find, they're obviously refueling from underneath or to the side or something like that. I even went so far as just recently researching some actual companies that do construct purpose-built solutions for the refilling of tankers. And of course, they all use a different method, but for the most part, it's quite similar. We need to get some sort of a hose in and fill this up, whether it's via pressurization or gravity fed. I've, of course, designed my own way of how it would pretty much work, and think a bit like a roller door. The hose itself that needs to create the high flow liquid coming in isn't coiled up like a garden hose, how some people do it, and I do not recommend that. But more so, it's a situation where the hose is sitting there attached to a winching system.
Stinger was the word I was looking for, and these stingers are often found on cable and pipe laying ships traveling the deeper parts of the ocean.
Well, I know we have quite a lot to talk about, and this has gone on far too long, and I'm about to reveal it all to you. But I recently got sent this publication, purchasing directory. I'm not in the industry of selling or doing power lines or any of this equipment, but it's always nice to get these trade catalogs when they do come about, filled with all your usual sort of news and what's going on in different industries, particularly in the industrial electrical situation. But it was actually from Scott Power Products and Hauling Range, and I couldn't help but notice this nifty little item here, which is basically what I'm trying to describe, where the hose would be lowering up and down accordingly. So with only a few hours until I finished editing, this was a welcome addition into my post box. Back to you, Joseph. Where it can be lowered down onto the tanker, and using my own proprietary coupling mechanism, which can be seen here. If you've purchased any popular type of cologne, perfume or fragrance, you'll notice a lot of them contain these type of magnetic connections, as seen here with a couple of bottles. Don't worry, it's a mirror. Okay, let's just have a look at some of these fragrances. So some of the more modern fragrances obviously have a situation where the lid is basically magnetized. So as you twist it off, it pops off. And it's a series of magnets, as you can see, that make it work. And that's kind of how I'd like to think the fueling thing comes down onto the tanker. It doesn't matter how it comes down. It will simply align. And when it's time to release, obviously I'm going to twist it, but they would just reverse the polarity of the magnet and it would literally just sit there waiting to be lifted out, and it would lift off like this. That's my theory. I like this one because it's not quite as dramatic. Not that I'm a big fan of the fragrance per se, but still, the whole idea is you can see it's a nice, simple action. And the whole idea is this would also be an electromagnetic connection that once it obviously comes and then locks on, it's in a polarity that will allow current to flow through and could automate that connection to say, now it has the power to open up the door upon the top of the tanker. It would then start flowing in, and a series of sensors on the top section that lowered it will be monitoring the flow rate and how much is filled up and connecting to other sensors to say how full it is in the actual tanker itself. As a result, once it's got enough of what it needs in it, the operator will then release it, in which case that would allow the door to close on the top of the tanker. And of course, it would reverse the polarity so that the magnet is then absolutely free. Motorized system we've used, and in my case, I've modeled it using a Wago connector, would gently sort of lift the pipe work. It would sort of start rolling up a bit like how a roller door works, where it starts to bring the pipe up and rolling it so it still stays in a position, whereas it goes up and down, we've never really compromised the flow rate of what that hose could be doing. That's the invention I've developed, and how maybe they were noodling around in the late 70s and some part during the 80s. And I also make mention that it would have, while it's located just over here, there's a perfect view, and this could have been a computerized system because we installed a series of surveillance cameras, could actually be done from the signal box. Also regarding our inspiration was more recently, I did just notice during my homework, I did spot this particular image from the Canada National Railway, where they have a fueling depot for their diesel locomotives. And what I'm really paying attention to is the base of how it's done. They sort of created their own sort of drainage system, almost like a sealant that was placed across where the sleepers are and the track work. So if there is a bit of a leakage, it obviously will funnel away into the drains. I took great inspiration from that, and we're going to see what I did to get that looking on this section. So that's how Josef's Model Railway made their refueling system work. So let's dive on in and check out how that construction went.
So to get a nice finish like this, I've been using dirt, and you can see it's not too bad. But for this particular application, it gets a bit different. I've been using this. I'm not really too worried about this top section. It's mostly just this fine type of buff or gravel, because we don't know what's going to be here in respect to the shed. So we're just going to keep it pretty neutral here and here, and we're not even going to worry too much about color on this side, really not on that here, because we know we're going to have a petroleum refilling, so the sort of oil and that sort of section here. Again, we're just going to take that black straight on here. Again, let's not get too carried away. Ballast is the next step we're going to work on here, because once that ballast is done, that's where we're going to tie it in a bit better. Because this section particularly is going to need to look quite oily and nasty. Drying just nicely there. Now, as you can see, what I've done, I've just taken these three colors and just with the knife, literally just dusted them directly onto where they need to be. Obviously building up the black where it needs to be and just worrying about that more sort of gray and concrete accordingly, and just dabbling a little bit of black as we go along, as you can sort of get a good shot here, definition with black here, and across the rail line here and toward the edge of the track work. Now we're going to take a brush and we're going to commence blending this in. So there's no real right or wrong way to do this. We just get started and see where we end up. Remember, as we start to build up a bit more landscape, we'll come back over and do this, but at the moment it's just to give it a bit of a light dusting to establish a little bit of a base here. The black around the edge here, because these particular tanks will be sitting there, and we're probably going to come back over with the machine oil to drop it over accordingly. Come over to where our main road section is that our tank is going to come rolling in on. You can see where we're going to bleed a bit more oil into there to create it to look like those bits of oil that build up around the track where the join was a bit ordinary, but at least as we start covering over where that track work is, it's not looking as bad now. Remember, we don't want to get that road base too close to the track, so we've got problems with the flanges on the wheels. Again, you can see where the white's coming through, and I'm still going to have to touch that up. I'm not really happy. I don't think that plaster of Paris is working out for me. The air clay isn't really a winner either, although we might come back and revisit that for some other projects by keeping a wet tea towel over it as it dries, but generally not really great for our applications. You can see how heavy this powder is. Of course, we're going to take it over with a vacuum cleaner before we go, but as long as we get this down, we can start with the ballasting and then we can start blending it together. But we do need a bit of a road base going on, so we've got the heights where they need to be. And I think you'll agree, as we're dusting this section over here, this actually isn't looking all that bad, as a matter of fact. But certainly I think with the air clay and the plaster of Paris, you will get better results. Just keep playing with it. We're in a climate that's not ideal. I'm certainly not turning the HVAC on just for this kind of application. So we welcome back scale model scenery, and we pick up some ladder catenary, and of course we also have the beams that we're going to span across to create this overhead fueling system. Again, just putting them together, it's quite straightforward. You can also fold back directly off the actual sprue itself and glue together. I found that a faster way to go. Make sure we glue in and put in the additional supports at the end of those, what we could deem to be called I-beams, if you like. As you can see, a straightforward build, and we're just using standard PVA. We'll let that dry. These actually go together quite quickly. A quick primer, we put just the Rust-Oleum on there, and then we're going to come back with, of course, our galvanized spray. Give it a couple of coats there just to give it that kind of industrial look. You'll also notice I'm just here in the background preparing the back end of where the track is, because I do need to create a little bit of a wall back there. We're going to come back and see that in action in just a moment, but pretty much I'm just getting the ballast laid into that back there. This is still a very accessible, and you can certainly see this section. I don't intend on covering it up. More a bit of a maintenance factor. Now I picked up this wonderful kit from Guagemaster because certainly where I wanted to have a fuel truck driving along and accessible to the refueling system, I needed some sort of overhead system to get it over there, and this really ticked a lot of boxes for me. The build process is quite straightforward, and again, building on the existing pipe work that I have from the Walthers kit, it's quite a straightforward process. Again, I did spray some of the pipe work in a white because I want to add a bit of personalization. But just pay special attention there to the height barriers there on this particular overhead gantry, because we're going to build our own as we carry on. As we glue and get the pipe work into place, just using some of my daughter's hair ties there to sort of hold it into position and step it where it needs to be. You'll notice some pipes protruding because I'm not sure where they're going to be just yet. A few little valves and taps, nothing too specific. Welcome a wonderful addition that we looked at during the process of doing the radio controlled circuit that we modeled in a previous video over at Noodle Knocker, and this AK product is just wonderful. I laid it down not knowing what to expect, but drawing inspiration from that Canadian National Rail that we saw with their refueling thing, this kind of semi-sealed system where if there was a leakage, it would run straight down to the drain grates. And of course, those grates are once again scale model scenery, a primer and a quick lick of a grey paint there. Pay attention to that back wall. And here's just a little bit of footage of me applying static grass. It basically is just a section of aluminium. I did take some of that flexible wall, attached it to that, and then a little bit of the styrofoam, carved it out where I could, a little bit of dirt, a little bit of grass on the top, and it just fits nicely and works. Gives me a bit of a look, and away we go. As you can see, we come along, let it dry. We're just dusting a little bit of additional ballast around the area to sort of finish off the seam. And I don't think this is starting to look all that bad. We're now going to take some of our styrene, we're taking our measurements, a few pins, and now it's time for us to start to try and get some key measurements and work out how we're actually going to build such an overhead refueling system for these tankers. I've come up with my own ingenious way of how it could work, and we'll go into that. But I did do some comprehensive research onto what some other people are doing. You'll see in the background there, we have got a laser level there. I do want to try and get this semi-accurate. It's certainly got a lot of room for improvement, but remember, we're trying to make this fit into a rather tight space. So while I would like to have a little more room on either side, I don't quite have that available. So while there's a road crossing over there in the middle, it doesn't really go anywhere, so I'll have a truck somewhere there that looks like it could go over, but that's where the seam becomes a bit limited. Once again, we do keep the laser on, and we're just weighting it down, because what we're actually using to create the actual frame, joining all this together to create one piece, that is, of course, and it does pain me to say this, a section of our wonderful Code 100 Peco track. We stripped out the sleepers, and here we are, where we took it outside and gave it a few coats of our galvanized spray. Again, we're outside, lovely sunshine, letting it dry naturally. But what it's going to do is, once we've glued it into position, it means that I can lift the whole assembly in and out with one movement. And that's going to become quite obvious later on down the track regarding maintenance. Again, gluing this thing down together, we're basically using the Gorilla Glue, although, as we'll see with some later product, we did carefully work toward using various different Zappit CA glues and having some fun with the Accelerate. Now, once it's sort of dried here, you can see I can move the entire assembly now in one hit. We come back once again now with our laser, and of course we are just gluing in another set of Peco rail. I sacrificed another section of track and I have painted it, and this is just to give a bit of additional reinforcement and also somewhere for me to mount the additional materials that are going to be needed to hang off of this. Once again, some more ingenious ways to weight everything down and using a laser to make sure we're all traveling in the right direction. It's not perfect, but if you are paying attention to some of the footage, you'll notice that it's perfect based on how the two lines need to curve back out. Well, that's 24 hours now. So we obviously have a top and bottom section of track we've used that'll create a little bit like an I-beam and look like a reinforcement. So we're going to take our materials off now. The peg was to indicate so I know which way this went on the layout, as if we wouldn't figure that out anyway. We're ready to now come along and install our pipe work.
Once again, happy wife, happy life, and I'm greeted with a wonderful slice of homemade apple pie, which went down a treat. That'll give you all the energy you need to carry on. So, we move over to an overhead shot now as we carry on, and basically what's going on now is we start cleaning up underneath, and we're starting to wire up the additional lighting that needs to go in here at the moment. I was going for more of a brighter white. What I've achieved is okay, and it can be changed later on, but we do want to get this in, and we want to start installing lighting that doesn't interfere with the actual overhead fueling rig that we currently have under construction, so I can still move it in and out without disrupting anything. Albeit we still have some yard lights that will need to additionally illuminate the area, but we'll do that as the scene will carry on in a later video.
So as we've just dropped that particular buffer into place, we've also just popped some wire down for some additional lighting that will be happening here. And of course we're going to use the fluoro lights in the whisk style double fluoros that we've just sat into place just loosely here at the moment onto the depot, which has been designed so we can slip the fueling frame in and out easily. And we've just dropped a bit of ballast and detail down the back here, and then while we put our glue in for it, we then slipped the backdrop out and we took the frame out so that this will all dry around it, and we've got a nice base. And here are the additional buffers waiting to be locked in once everything is dry and good to go. And that's pretty much going to do it for the lower level. Also the ground signals we've just done, and I'm going to come back and talk to you about that a little later. Some interesting things we've done there.
A lot of umming and ahhing ended up seeing me purchase, again from Scale Model Scenery, some additional catwalks and indeed the safety railings that can go with them. Once again, we're out there doing a spot of painting, a little bit of safety yellow, which is commonly what we see, and I did my best to just try and get them painted in the top half. You'll notice on those rails, they're not all yellow, just one of the tops. And they're not perfect, but certainly as first appearance goes, it looks quite weathered nicely. We then need to assemble a series of stairs to actually get up there. And this is a bit of a slow process, but the idea was to build two and then snip down the additional length needed from the second one and attach it to the first one. Customize my own little handrails there, but the result turned out to be reasonable. Once again, once constructed, as always, you can see I've just licked a bit of galvanized spray straight onto it to give it that sort of a appearance. I also do go back and just lightly dab them with a sponge and a little bit of a light rust. Maybe I think I did just also sponge on a little bit of the wash as well, just to give it that sort of more used appearance. You can see once again PVA is the dominant glue. We're just putting in together here and making sure our steps are nice and straight. I do like Scale Model Scenery for this exact reason. Look at those wonderful grills we have on there. Well, it's time to finally drill the holes and get the buffer stops in, and it looks like a good fit to me at the moment. And now we have our exact measurements to carry on and know where we need to put the overhead hose work to make this all link up. We need to keep those buffers weighted down. That's why you see those drills holding it in place. Quick look underneath now, you can see the wiring is nice and tidy for what we've done, and we did just wire those buffer stops to make that red light illuminate directly onto the 12-volt accessories rail underneath. You will also notice that I did take a series of dark black paint and I just put it over that red LED just to soften it. It was quite strong. Taking some of our evergreen styrene H-beams here, we get them painted up. These are basically going to create a substructure where we can now start taking the pipe work and attaching it now to our frame. Taking time now to start our overhead walkways, and as you see bit for bit, there's no real right or wrong way. I've got to make use with what I've got. I don't have enough to make two nice clean gangways running on either side with the appropriate crossovers. So there's a little bit where you might say, how come it went here and then came back the other way? It's basically using what I've got. The logic would be to buy another kit, but if we get a bit too overcrowded up there, it's hard to really look down and see the actual tankers themselves. So finding a happy balance is really what this one was all about for me. Please note the little red pegs on the rig at the moment. These are absolutely imperative since I've measured out where the tankers need to be and where the middle top section meets for where a hose would need to be able to be lowered in to fill up the tanker accordingly. And as always, a few drops of glue and some creative ways to ensure that everything is being held in place. So now we take a few of the pipes that are left over, including some of the sprue we'll recycle again. A quick lick of green and red paint. We obviously just want to indicate our fresh water running in, and also for the pressurized fire hydrant line that is common in a lot of industrial applications you may well see. I also took a moment here to construct my own overhead safety barrier, as we were making mention from the overhead pipework gantry that in the kit we'd constructed you saw a few moments ago. So once again, leftover cut off the sprue here. I thought this seems to be about the right size. Wrapped it up in just a little bit of the masking tape, and obviously the base color was in red. I covered it up and then did it in white.
This is the point where you should stop and leave it, because you may well make it worse, like what I did just there. And we'll just leave this to dry. And we're going to trim this down to fit the size. Stab it into some sand. And that can dry. And that's basically where it's going to sit on this section. So I hit a snag. The feeding pipelines will need to drop a line down, one line, two line. So I had this little piece of plastic in the kit, and I thought, wouldn't this be handy? Because I could sit it on the top, connect the pipe work to it, and then dangle something in between that would line up with that. The problem is I don't have 8 of these. So I thought, if I don't have 8 of these, what's another contraption we could come up with? Basically just a little black square. Then I came down to this idea here. You'll remember we've discussed these. These are these knockoff Wago or Vargo connectors. You can buy a box of these for less than $10 on most popular trading sites. What I'm interested in is the double, because it's about the size I'm looking for. We might need to do some paint and modification, but the point is, for the interconnectors between lines 1 and 2, here's a thin piece of the white pipe we'll be using, fed by the master pipes, which will be the thicker one. But I thought we could build basically a series of these. We'll only have to make 4 of them, and we'll configure them in this type of pre-arranged thing, so they'll always drop in and line up. And of course, using that thinner one, we can take a piece of pipe, slide it in, lock it down, and we have something nice. That's going to be rigid, solid. I can sit it on the top, plus I can use that second side to drop the hose of whatever I'm using that goes down. And this will act as like the petrol pump, so to speak, which is controlling flow, volume, and indicating when the tank's full or not. So this is basically the theory I'm going to use. And we'll knock up a few of these based on size, and then they're all going to line up nicely. Now, the way my refueling system would work is how I constructed it. I just used a series of Wago connectors. I took a spare piece of pipe, slotted them into position with the measurements, and then obviously with the second part, dangled out what is basically just a piece of insulated wire. I also just took one of the
white painted end caps of the pipe work in the kit, and I just attached it to the tip. It might not seem like a big deal, but the actual look looks surprisingly good underneath the model itself when the tank is under there. Tanker comes into place, and this is all being controlled via the signal booth. There's another operator, which, as you will see, I spent some time putting in a series of security cameras, or CCTV, that allows the operator to ensure things are in the right position. Really, the only one that needs to believe it is me, and I've got my full justification on how my system works, and I don't think it would be all that bad if we were trying to implement it into the real world. And as you can see on these additional pictures here, we've obviously got our fire hydrant line. We also have our fresh water line in green. We also have our orange electrical conduit line. We have our two main feeders for petroleum and a third one which could be carrying something else. I really haven't come to that just yet. But the ability is they can obviously pump different types of fuel down the line. I also like to think with an airport, particularly my model airport sitting on the other side of the room, that's why we've chosen this particular BP truck. Maybe they service a local airfield or something like that. So I thought this is really just really tying into a really good scene that we're trying to create on this layout. Oh, sorry. Oh, you're still with me? I told you it was an epic one. I'm sorry about that. A couple of quick things as we're going to wrap it up now. As I mentioned, we're going to come back and we're going to tidy it all up nicely as needed with some landscaping as we start to create now our faulty tower section. We're now going to have a foam board out and we're going to start creating this sort of mountain, so to speak. I also wanted to share with you quickly, which this particular photo was taken less than 12 hours prior to my father's visit, who did come up earlier in the year and did obviously shoot that video for us. We saw a few videos back. As a result, the room was in complete and utter disarray, as you can see through the whole construction of what we were doing. And isn't it refreshing to know that it was completely emptied out and trains were placed back on the track within that 12-hour period? And yes, I did not get any sleep, but you've got to love what you do.
Well, this is getting ridiculous. We better stop things here. I really did want to come back, and I've been starting to commence some fencing, and we still need to add a bit of greenery, security gates, things like that. We still need the refueling section for the actual locomotives themselves, but I think we're just going to have to stop for the moment and come back to another video. This will be the longest video in the series. So just before we conclude, we're going to show a few parting shots. We're going to lower it back into place with the back wall and have a look at it, pop some lights on, move a few tankers in place so you can see what we've got. But the actual structure itself is complete, and the rest will just be tidying up as we complete the rest of the scene. So let's have a look at that now and we'll wrap up.
Well, enjoy it while you can, because this is a shot you're not going to see much longer. Soon there will be the gentle hillside of faulty towers here, and these images will be completely separated, but this is truly a magical shot. I am so happy with the lighting and how all this has come up. Well, girls and boys, ladies and gentlemen, that does now bring us to the end of yet another video. The biggest in the series, and more than 4 weeks to get this one edited. And while we've still got a long way to go with this project, I really could not be happier with the product that we've turned out at the moment in what was always going to be an almost impossibly tight space. There is just so much to drink in with it, and while we've still got a long way to come, the functionality of seeing the locomotive and the tankers rolling in here to get refueled is really something else. The lighting and the shadows that we've created are really beyond my expectations. We still need to do a bit more with overhead flood lighting, but the original concept I came up with for the fluoro lighting in between is absolutely magnificent. I'm sorry in the video we didn't feature more of our little truck, but expect to see that when we return to this in a future video. In the meantime, as always, thank you so much, particularly for your patience. For those of you that stuck through and watched the whole thing, for the rest of you, I hope you did just fast forward through it all to get what you need. It's a magnificent outcome. As always, please do stay safe, and we will see you in the next one. Toodles!